What's happening in the canine industry? For all the latest news, views, and expert opinions, stay right here for the Canine Paradigm. You'll hear from industry leaders, experts, doyens of the industry, learned colleagues, movers and shakers, and the odd randy guest. Get the latest insights and expert advice from both here and abroad from the people in the know. Now, here are your hosts, Glenn Cook and Pat Stewart. And I'm Lofty Fulton, and I'm out of here.
Glenda?
Yes.
We have to do a new ad.
We do.
It's a solemn time. Our long-time sponsor of the show, George Kittredge,
Yes.
very, very sadly passed away. And we formerly used to advertise for him his Rowdy Hound boxes.
We did.
So we don't actually know what's happened with Rowdy Hound boxes. You know anything about that?
I looked at the website. It said that they're recalibrating since their founder and boss has passed. But nonetheless, I think that you and I want to honour the memory of George Kittredge anyway. He was a friend to both of us, a hell of a good guy, and he supported us almost immediately. He was on board through and through, and I just don't want any of us to forget George. He was a terrific human being.
So we intend to continue to advertise Rowdy Hound even though we don't know what's going on with them.
Yep.
In the hopes that they keep going and that can be a bit of George's legacy that we're able to continue to promote.
I hope so.
In checking it out, we had a look to see, because we're not real good with the sponsorship. So we had a look to see who's actually paying for sponsorship. And we have a list of people to tell you that we support. And the first is our sugar mama, Barbara de Groot.
She's been with us from the start as well. Barbara's been an absolute staple in our...
She's a gem.
She is a gem.
She has a business.
She does. From the Heart Dog Training.
From the Heart Dog Training.
Yeah.
You can check it out. But she supports us as much and more than anybody ever has. So we appreciate you very much, Barbara. Another person who's supported us from the start.
The Einzelwiener.
Einzelwiener.
The Bullfed.
The Bullfed.
Yep.
It's where I get all my stuff.
Yeah.
It is, truly. It's where I get all my dog gear. If I need something, Jason's my first point of call. I don't use his shit website. He has a website. It's dog shit. I just message him directly. You guys probably should use his shit website, but I don't.
Yeah, because you don't want to message him directly and get his grumpy ire of the day.
Yeah, but do it. Get all your dog stuff from Jason. He's got everything you need. He's got all the shit that you need to train a dog for realty.
Everybody who comes to seminars and looks at mills and asks me mills questions, ask Jason.
Yeah.
Jason can point you in the right direction for getting the mill that's best suited for you.
I really like his leashes. I'm a big fan of his leash pack. That's why I sort of convinced him to do it. But anyway, get your stuff from Einzelwiener.
Yep.
Do you know who has a fantastic website and ships internationally?
My wife?
Your wife,
Yeah.
Canine Pharmaceuticals.
I couldn't imagine her not having a good website, how much of a perfectionist she is.
Well, the products are amazing. My dog merely being alive is a walking testimonial to that. My dog, who I've retired numerous times and has come out of retirement when I've managed to get his body back to healthy, and a big part of that is related to Canine Pharmaceuticals. So check it out, everybody.
I could say so many nice and biased things about Canine Pharmaceuticals and my wife, but what I will say is ignore me. Just look at testimonials. The testimonials speak for themselves. That's where the field trials are working. What makes Narelle's day, and mine as well, is when people are emailing in and sending messages of, well, primarily people have had no hope in the past because just everything that they were trying wasn't working, and now it is. And that is the testament that something is actually really working. And the other thing, which I will add, one of the things that Narelle's told me in the past is dogs are incapable of understanding the placebo effect.
Oh, that's a good point.
So you can fake it on a human, but you can't fake it on a dog.
I never thought about that before. That's actually a really good point.
Well, my wife's actually a very smart person.
There you go.
So she's told me that humans are subject to the placebo effect where dogs are not. So it either works or it doesn't on dogs.
There you go. That makes total sense.
Yep.
There's one other person who puts a fair amount of work into this show.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yeah. Funny about that.
And I have a digital product that you can buy. If you go to my website, seriousdogbusiness.com, right now I've got 2 courses available to you. The Overview, which is a small course where you could learn how I teach.
Yep.
But the other one is the Wave Tops, which is a bigger course. It's everything I know about dog training. Well, it's not everything. It's a lot of what I know about dog training.
Yeah,
Check it out.
terrific. Yeah.
$500 dues. That's all it's going to cost you.
I recommended when people are saying, what do I do? How do I get in the industry? I recommend them to your course.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks,
Yeah.
sir. All right, on with the show. Welcome back to the Canine Paradigm. I'm your host, Pat Stewart, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Glenn Cook. Hello, sir.
Hello, sir. And just before we get going, I thought we might stay safe and thank Beyonce.
Have you? That's wild. Huh?
That's-
Do you reckon that's legit, or is that just nonsense?
I just don't know. I don't know with everything that seems to be going on. You know, there's so much going on in the dog industry at the moment, but there's so much going on in the world at the moment where this Illuminati concept and these Diddy parties and link back to the Weinstein and the Edelstein drama that's been going on. It's freakish and bizarre. And legitimately, if there is, I'm no prude. I've never been a prude. You're not a prude either. We're two non-prudish guys. Like if rich people want to get together and have orgies, good on them. That's wonderful. But when you're talking about drugging and seducing underage kids, that's,
exactly.
Pedophilia and all that sort of stuff, all that non-consensual stuff is completely where I draw the line on all of that. And any moral person would do the same. I think most of the people that I know have good moral ethics and standards when it comes to those sort of things. Like you can be a bit kinky and stuff in whatever you want to do in your own time with a consenting partner, but that sort of shit just doesn't fly and it shouldn't. And people, no matter how much money they've got in their bank account and how influential they are, they should go to fucking jail for all that sort of shit that they're doing. And names should be dropped. People should be exposed if they're behind some of that fucking wretched behavior.
So I'll bet people who aren't mad conspiracy theorists like us are presently thinking like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why is Beyonce involved in this? Let me just preface something. Do you remember years and years ago, right? Like when we first started hanging out together, you know, like those important conversations where you can kind of like remember the smell in the air at the time?
Exactly. Yep.
I can remember sitting in your kitchen and having a conversation about like alien spaceships.
Yeah.
And you were telling me, you weren't directly saying, hey man, there's definitely a secret government program that is about aliens, but you were sort of like intimating that you thought that was the case.
Yep.
And I remember sitting there and I remember saying, Glenn, listen, mate, I've got a top secret clearance. I'm briefed into many, many, many top secret compartments. I hold the highest clearance that you can possibly get. I know about some of the wild shit that goes on in the world. I've been in the skiff and been briefed in on what really happens. And like one of the reasons why I don't watch the news is because I know that that's all wrong. I was only recently out of the army. I was still doing other stuff. Like I held my clearance. I still knew the right people to get the real information. And I was like, mate, I'm telling you, there's no secret government program that does aliens. Like I know stuff.
And
right?
look at you now.
So, I don't know how, like it's maybe 8 or 9 years later, I am so deep in it. There is for sure, without a doubt, a secret government thing. But here was my strongest proof, and this still holds to me as a curiosity, was that when Osama bin Laden was killed, they crashed that stealth Black Hawk, right? Now, I didn't know there was a stealth Black Hawk. I did not know that was a thing. I had never seen one. I'd seen some cool, super secret military tech, you know, like I've been involved in jobs where the agent embedded, like, you know, where my unit was an assault force for a very secret agency, and where like you can't even see what's on the laptop screen of the guy who's working with you, right? Like where they wear the cloak over their head, over their laptop, so you can't even see who they're texting and what they're talking to on the ground. I was just there as an assaulter, right? So like I've done some cool shit. I've been involved in some like secret shit. And so I was like, mate, I'm telling you, if they had those alien ships, that's what they go and get Osama bin Laden with. Like the fact that they crashed that stealth Black Hawk is the only reason we now know that there was a stealth Black Hawk involved, and they blew it up on the site. Like they destroyed as much of it as they possibly could, so people won't be able to reverse engineer too much of it. Beyond stealth of that kind is more about the paint and the angles of the panels rather than anything like cloaking technology and shit like that. But that was what I hung my hat on. I was like, no way. There's fucking no way. And now, 2 days ago, there's another hearing in the US. Is it the Senate or is it a congressional hearing or whatever the fuck they have, of like more people giving testimony about the secret government alien spaceship fucking program.
Even Trump,
I've done 180, mate.
Yeah, even Trump, when he was on Rogan and Rogan was asking him directly, like he said, have you seen the files on JFK and aliens? He said, look, I was handed the files, and he goes, and I opened them. And then I was told, Mr. President, this is not the time to go into this. And he said, yes, I have looked at some of these files, and I have spoken to people involved in the Air Force who have been on mission when they've encountered these crafts and have no explanation for it. And he said, it's incredible. And he said, you know, like I was involved in a lot of my own personal issues with running the government at the time. And he said, and they just advised me that this is not the right time to do it. And he said, but when I get back in the office now, he goes, I'm opening those files.
And look, I think that the JFK stuff, clearly, CIA killed JFK. Like, I think that that's what we're all about to find out. He wouldn't play ball. He wouldn't go to war when they wanted him to go to war. And so it was like, well, if we can fucking get rid of you. And that's what's going to be declassified. I'll be surprised if it's anything else. But the alien shit or that they've got these craft. Now, bear with us, listeners. I promise this will have some relevance to you at some point. But the thing of it is, it's going to turn out that they don't know anything about them, that they have them, that they've been crashing. They don't know if they're alien or interdimensional or time travelers or what the fuck they are. And that's more scary than the fact that they exist. The fact that they have the ship and they don't know anything about them. But the big reason why I personally think they can't just go full disclosure, they'll need someone like Trump, I suppose, or any president to give them the immunity from prosecution because of the mishandling of it. And I think that that's exactly what does need to happen. They need to say like, oh, okay, look, this thing that you can't possibly understand that could be from outer space or another dimension or somewhere else in time just appeared. And yeah, okay, you gave it to Boeing or to Raytheon or to Lockheed Martin or all of them to try and reverse engineer, and then you invested in those companies. Fair enough. You were a human being. That is forgiven. You get to keep the $1 billion that you made from handing that over to them and them investing in them. But we want the information because that's what's holding it back. That's what's holding the disclosure back was the illegal mishandling of the chain of evidence of these things. So my point is, we are both now hardcore conspiracy theorists in what has turned out to be all these things are coming true, right? Like, so you've indoctrinated me. But the Beyonce one, for people who are unaware, it turns out, and now again, like we're trusting memes here, right? Which memes are my primary source of news these days. So I'm happy to, they're often truer than the real news.
Yep.
Is that everybody who's ever beaten Beyonce for a Grammy, if you're nominated against Beyonce for a Grammy and don't make a big deal of thanking her, remember that Adele's one was really strange. Like Adele really carried on about how wonderful Beyonce was.
She was bawling on stage.
Yeah. Please don't kill me, Beyonce. Please don't kill me, right? Turns out that everybody who's ever beaten Beyonce for a Grammy and has not thanked her is dead. Yep. Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm not doing the research.
Yeah, it's only allegations, but it seems bizarre that people are making such a fuss of her. And what is it all about?
Yep. Well, I'll be pissed if it turns out it's true because I really liked Amy Winehouse. I was very sad to find out she was killed and was dead. It seems that she didn't thank Beyonce appropriately when she beat her for a Grammy.
Allegedly.
Yep. We have no information on this. What do we know? We're just a pair of dickheads that should be talking about dogs and are presently talking about conspiracy theories.
All right. So to swing this back into the dog conversation, last episode we talked about some of the crazy gatekeepers involved in the rescue frontage who are holding those positions of power where they could delegate whether or not a dog went into a facility or a home, I should say, not a facility. It sparked a good conversation. I've had people that have messaged me about it and just had a couple of things to add to it or supported some of the points that we made and said, yes, that they've also had difficulty in those sort of situations as well. As I was reading to you prior to starting and inspiring our conversation today, which is mainly about accountability in the industry, which is why we started off with thanking Beyonce. Number one, so the Illuminati don't come after us, allegedly. And number two, that she's done some good music in the past. Mainly with Destiny.
I've enjoyed.
Yeah, mainly with Destiny's Child. Destiny's Child, she was great. So Alicia, who is a friend and colleague to both of you and I and many people in the industry, who also has been in the industry for a long time, done the NDTF, been involved in shelters and rescue centres, sent a message to both of us that says, hey lads, just listen to your latest episode. As someone in rescue and shelters, etc. for the last 13 years, I couldn't agree more with your sentiments. The pendulum of the industry swings so far one way or the other. There is a lack of balance and understanding, especially relating to the successful rehoming of dogs. I've recently overhauled our adoption procedures to remove some of what I believe are unnecessary barriers. There is a flip side, however, and I've been guilty of this before. The tenacity of the general public to push through and settle dogs inappropriately and do what it takes is slim to none. I've had dogs and puppies returned after less than 24 hours because they didn't bond immediately, cried or barked, shed too much hair, or followed the person around. The excuses are incredulous. In addition, the reasons for surrenders that rescue shelters deal with upwards of 25 times per day are disgraceful. No time, had a baby, cat purrs too much, legit reason happened not long ago. So therefore, I do have to wonder if people in the industry see this and become so jaded that they try and reduce the likelihood of return or surrender at any cost, usually keeping the animal in a shelter well past a suitable time frame. It's a huge conversation to have and unpack with lots of nuances, but wanted to drop you a note to say love your work.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. And I agree entirely. Like, I think that we tried to sort of point that out a little bit, that for sure there are rescues that do wonderful jobs, and that I suppose what we were trying to explain, and I think we did an okay job of it because Alicia sort of acknowledges it there, is that there's exceptions to things. So like, I think rescues have a lot of those very strict rules in place that do exclude a lot of people who would be fantastic fits to take on a rescue because they are trying to prevent the returns. But what we were pointing out was that there needs to be a bit of a more nuanced approach to that, in that just because you don't have the right fence doesn't mean that you should be ruled out immediately, or just because you don't work the right hours that they want you to work doesn't mean you should be ruled out immediately. There should be sort of more investigating on like, who specifically are you and what's your capacity to care for this dog?
Yeah, mate, totally agree. I think that, as we pointed out in last week's episode, and to balance off what Alicia said and other people that have had general short conversation with me during the week, is there's always two sides to a story. And I 100% agree. I feel, as you stated, I feel that we conveyed that. And if we didn't, I apologize, because it was certainly meant to be conveyed in the conversation, is that we certainly believe there's two sides to the story. And I'm not talking about the people in shelters or rescues or any of these organizations that are working tirelessly and are, like the industry burnt out people. A lot of these people are just flogged for minimum wage, and they work incredible hours. They do a hell of a lot for the industry and for the pets involved in them as well. And they do see some of the turds of the industry, or just people that are drifting through and are enamored with the idea of having some little fluffy creature, until they understand that these little fluffy creatures make noise, smell a bit, piss on the floor here and there, and need to be walked and need to be fed. And then suddenly the novelty wears off, and suddenly they're finding themselves like, oh, I've got this creature that I don't really like. It just seemed like, while I was watching memes on the internet and I saw all these cute little bonding moments, that would be me. Not understanding that takes a lot of work. There's a lot of backstory involved in that as well. And the wonderful thing that I always point out about social media is that you're seeing the best of, unless you're seeing the worst of videos. But mainly the novelty of social media is that you're seeing people's wonderful day where they've manufactured something, or it's a snapshot in time where you haven't seen the frustration where they're swearing at the dog for everything else it's done, and it's been driving them mad and disrupting their life as well. But the difference between them and that problematic person who wants to return the dog or the cat or whatever pet that they've got is these people see it through. They understand, I do love this dog. It's family. Just like family, there are good days and there are annoying days, but we can endure some of those annoying days because we've made allowances for it. Imagine that. Imagine if you had kids, and don't imagine it because people literally do it, where they have kids and they go, I didn't really want kids. I just wanted to have all the fuckery without the children. And they hand them off. They just give them up and give them away. There are other circumstances where people are mentally unwell and they can't care for children because they can't care for themselves, and that's a very sad situation. And even in pet care, that's been a similar situation that I've been involved in, the assisting of rehoming animals before, where people have got some pretty severe mental illness and they can't care for themselves. They're in and out of facilities, they're changing medications, and they're just not in a good place. Even though they love the animal and the animal was great for their mental health, but their mental health is modulating so rapidly that they are in a very, very unfortunate situation. I've shared in those sort of frustrations before until I've been a bit more wide-eyed about it and realised this is actually a good reason for rehoming this animal. You are legitimately doing the right thing by everybody in this situation. And I think you and I have talked about this before, even in working dog homes, where if somebody's got a dog with a mission, like it's going to be a working dog either for law enforcement or a sport, and that dog's definitely not going to cut the mustard, then the dog's going to have a reduced capacity lifestyle of staying with you, because you're going to either A, get another dog, or B, resent having that dog, and the dog's not going to live its best life. It's the opportunities aren't going to be available to it where somebody else who's willing to take that animal in and love it to the full capacity that the dog or the cat or whatever it is deserves. I think that has to be acknowledged, that is the best thing for the animal at that point in time. And it's very easy for many of us to sit on our ivory thrones and judge with those sort of situations, because we hear a snapshot of the situation and we get fed up of it because we do see the disposable people who are the pricks of the industry in general life, because they just come in and they're, as I used the word before, they become enamored with this idea that I can be this wonderful pet parent and I can be an influencer online and have this wonderful backstory relationship with the pet that I've just got, but have no intentions of doing any of the hard work around it, and then realize it's all too hard. I don't want it. It's disrupting my life. I can't go down the cafe and be a pretentious little turd pretending to write my life's novel and getting people interested, all those things.
Matt, I agree. I think the big thing of like rehoming a dog is a big thing. And I know we've spoken on it in the past. I think that it's something that I'll always defend people's right to do. Like, I think that when the rescue conversation comes up, there's this assumption that you're saying like anybody who puts their dog into rescue is a piece of shit. Now, that's not the case. And I think as well, for sure, us as dog people, like I've had dogs that didn't pan out that I have rehomed. And I've also had clients and friends come to me and, you know, for whatever circumstances they're in, they can't continue to keep the dog that they have. Like, and that might be that the dog and a child, like the dog's no good around their kids and they didn't know that. The dog had never been around kids until they had their own, and the dog's highly stressed in the situation and doesn't want to be around it. And so the dog's otherwise good dog and therefore should be rehomed to somewhere without children. It's not like it's a danger to children. It just doesn't want to live with a kid crawling around on the floor, all the way up to I've had people that are moving overseas and can't take the dog because the life that the dog would have overseas would be terrible and their capacity to look after it is diminished in that overseas state. And for us, it's usually pretty easy to rehome a dog because we have the network for that, right? We're dog people. And so for me, I've been involved in the private rehoming of many, many, many dogs. And I'm usually pretty careful. I almost regret saying this out loud, is because I don't do that willy-nilly for people. That's not something that a random person can contact me about. It's got to be somebody who I have a relationship with, and it's got to be somebody like a dog that I know usually. I either know the dog well already, or I can make a very thorough assessment on what would be the right approach to rehome this dog and do that appropriately. And I think that mine and yours ability to do that is very good, but it is very finite. That's why I'm very selective about the people that I'll do that for, because I need to know the dog and I need to know the circumstances, because I'm very successful at doing it because I don't do it very often. Similarly, with people who I've had as clients, the one that always comes to mind, I've done it many, many times, but there's one in particular that really comes to mind, was these people with a Springer Spaniel that was just basically destroying their lives, right? Like it was the best little dog. And I said to them, look, this dog's great. It's just that you don't do the things that this dog needs to have done, right? Like this dog, similar to mine, just can't stop. You wanted a fluffy little loving dog because you saw a show line Springer and you didn't get that. You got an off-tap working dog here, and this dog needs to work. So we can either do nose works or you can take up hunting, or you can, like, you either need to become a real dog person or the dog's got to go to someone else. And they had a very strong, no, we're not people that give up on our dog. I was like, okay, so we're going to take up training this dog to a really high standard. We're going to do cool stuff with the dog. And they're like, no, we're also not those people either. And I was like, okay, so you're in telling me instead you're going to be people who resent your dog for the next 15 years and basically torture this dog into flattening out. The issue as well, like a lot of those sort of off-tat Springers, like sometimes our job as trainers is to flatten someone's dog out. Unfortunately, we've all had to do that at one point or another. If you've been in this long enough, you get a dog that is too much for somebody, but they want to keep the dog, and you go like, okay, well, there's things we can do here to get the dog to stop displaying so much drive. And it, like, don't be imagining some brutality, but it's not great for the dog, but it's easy enough to do. But Springers can be especially tricky to do that, right? Because especially that the hunt drive in them can be so off tap, and their willingness to go through things, accept emotional pressure. And so then, as I explained to these people, like, you're going to be left sort of emotionally shutting down this dog for the rest of your life over and over and over. So I'm not really interested in teaching you how to do that. And I don't want that to happen to this dog. But I know people who will pay good money for this dog. Like this dog is a wonderful dog to other people. And then they're like, oh, but he'll live in a kennel. I'm like, yeah, well, you're locking him outside. Like if he goes to customs or whoever, if he goes and becomes a real working dog, like, yep, he'll probably live in a kennel. He'll come out to do his work. He'll have a handler that thinks of him as a work tool, but loves him, but he is still a working dog to that person. And if they leave the job that they're in, the dog will stay and the dog will miss them. Like, yep, these are all the risks. These are all the things that we're potentially taking on. But what you're getting is that you don't have this dog that you resent for the next 15 years. Like you get the opportunity to restart. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong beyond perhaps not fully researching the breeder. But even then, such a powerful working dog, it's not a reliable thing to produce. It's not like the breeder knew that they were giving you this off-tap dog. They just gave you a nice little Springer that at 8 weeks old was just a cutie little puppy that ran around. And now at, 12, 18 months old is a proper worker who wants to work. So the rehoming of those dogs, like we sold the dog, I bought the dog from them and then sold to someone else for the same cost. Like I didn't make any money out of it. I just sort of transitioned it over. But those people then get to restart. They're not left in a position of resenting their dog. And I think that's sometimes the alternative that people put themselves into. When we say to people, like, you can never rehome your dog, doing so is you're giving up on the dog. Well, yeah, it is. Like, for sure, you're giving up on the dog, but you're also very oftentimes creating a better circumstance for the dog. And for us who are able to privately rehome dogs and put them into much better positions for the rest of their life, we have the capacity to do that. We have a finite capacity to do that, but we do have the capacity to do it. For people who are outside of our sphere, who are people who are not dog people, they've just got this headache dog, and perhaps they can't afford to get in a trainer because, like, dog trainers are expensive. Good ones are expensive. There's plenty of people saying, like, just get a trainer. If you can't afford it, you shouldn't have bought the puppy. Like, that's all fine. But a lot of times people get dogs for not much, or they don't anticipate that. They don't budget that they're going to need a trainer. And sometimes, depending on who you're hiring and their model of training and stuff like that, like, you can be in for thousands and thousands of dollars when you go to the trainer, especially if you're the kind of person, like, not to sort of open this fucking can of worms, but if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to use aversives on their dog and doesn't want to use negative reinforcement or positive punishment, you want to go that, like, positive reinforcement primarily route, you can find yourself doing a lot of sessions with a trainer. And we have a lot of trainers who will happily do that because then, oh, sweet, we've got a super problematic dog that we're going to do a 1 hour lesson once a week, in which time I'm going to be showing you all these force-free techniques. But a lot of people then see that you're a fantastic client. You're a 6 month at whatever, 1 session or 2 sessions a week, whatever. Like, you're a great person to have on the books. And so a lot of trainers are very happy to have those people as clients, taking their money over and over. And some people can't afford that shit, especially in this economy. There's plenty of people who are facing very real decisions about paying their mortgage versus radically altering their lifestyle and shit like that at the moment, right? And very often, if you've got kids that are costing you a ton of money, the choice of who gets to go is the dog, not the fucking kids. So, like, I get it. I get that there's lots of reasons why people would have to put their dog into rescue. We're not calling those people pieces of shit. Like, that happens. But what's usually missing, it's the big piece that's missing from so many conversations happening right now in the dog space, is personal accountability. Like, somebody actually going like, hey, that's on me. I made that mistake. And I think that we're all guilty of that. Again, like, to preface, because I know that it will come, I get the irony of we're not perfect people. There's plenty of times where, maybe I could have applied more blame to myself or realized that I was a person who contributed more to a situation than I realized at the time, for sure. But I think that what we see, it relates to what we talked about last week in terms of rescue. It relates to the very large and ongoing dramas that we continue to see in the dog space, is people taking that moment of reflection and going like, okay, how have I contributed to this? Like, what have I done that has led to this situation happening? And what role have I played in it? And what causes have I created that have created this effect that we're now seeing?
Yeah, that's a fascinating insight into that topic. And while you were talking about that, it was refreshing, a conversation, well, several actually, that I had during the week of people that were talking to me about the expense of supplementing their dogs, because they were sort of saying to me, you're on a high at the moment, you're recommending your wife supplements, and what about people who can't afford those sort of things? What do they do and how do they overcome these situations? Or if they can't afford what you're recommending and they get something else, like, how do you know it's the right material, etc. I get it. I understand this affordability argument, whether, you're talking about keeping a dog, whether that's emotional, whether that's financial, whether, we're talking about feeding, now that I'm on this high horse about nutrition and diet and supplements in training and so forth. I get it. I understand that it can lead to some very life-changing sort of situations. The number one thing that I will say, and a caveat that I've tried to express for a long time now, if I get the chance or the opportunity to talk to somebody in their pathway of deciding whether or not they're going to bring a dog or an animal into their lifestyle, generally what I will do is I will stop and have a conversation gratis. It's not something that I charge them for. It's not something that I sit down and say, well, you have to do a consult with me. If it's just part of a conversation where we're talking on the street about these type of things, I pretty much lay it on the line what the investment is for them as far as emotional time, physical time, and financial investments that's going to be involved in it. Because they've got to understand that money is not just the crucible here. It's also, if you put your own time in it, if money is the issue here, you've got to think about it as time as well, because people forget about this. They don't realize all of the time that they've got to put into it, because that has to have some financial impact on the house as well. Like, can I afford to do this if I've got this entity taking up space in my home? It's not that I'm trying to say to people, you don't deserve to have a dog or you don't deserve to have the joy of having a companion animal. It's just ask yourself the question, does your lifestyle support this? Because it can be incredibly frustrating, and the problems that you think it's going to cure, it can actually highlight some of them sometimes. I've seen situations where the mental health issue has been exacerbated because of the dog. The relationship breakdown from the husband and wife or the couple has been exacerbated because of the dog. So these sort of things have to come into true account when people are considering, do I have the suitable lifestyle and the capability to allow this entity to occupy space in my life? You and I wanted to have a conversation on accountability in the industry when we first started this conversation. Accountability is not being so impulsive when you're talking about bringing a life into your life. Because I think what you really need to do as part of that package of accountability is look deep within yourself and say, am I doing this because I'm trying to fill a hole that's there because of X, Y, and Z, some emotional trauma or some form of even physical trauma that's happened in my life, and I'm thinking getting a dog or a cat or an animal is going to, or having a baby is going to solve this problem. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's the best decision you've ever made. For me, it was. The emotional damage that I had during my childhood was supplemented by having a dog. The dog rescued me. Having Harley made me feel true love. Like, I never really truly loved anybody because I didn't feel loved as a kid. My mum would be heartbroken to think that, because she did love me, and so did Dawn and all these other wonderful people in my life. But it doesn't matter what people project on you. It's what you feel. And these are the big things that when you're talking about the concept of getting inside somebody's head, it's what people feel about a certain situation. For me, it worked. And for other colleagues, it hasn't worked. There's been people that I know that it's caused all of their problems. Then when they are faced with that traumatic situation of, I don't really like this animal. On paper, it sounded good, but in reality, the concept just doesn't work. Like, it really screws my life up. And then when they have that concept of, now I'm a piece of shit, and that starts the spiral of how they emotionally feel after they're invested in this, and this online barrage of the ivory tower people come after him and say, well, you can't do that now. What about the poor dog? What about the poor cat? What about the poor horse or anything like that? What they also have to consider, and it was you, Pat, it was a conversation that you and I had a long time back in one of our episodes where you really made me think about this concept quite a lot. And I went away from it after the podcast and thought about it for many weeks. And it's still something that echoed in my head is, we have these thoughts and feelings, or have other people's influences on thoughts and feelings about what's best for us. But have we considered the other entity in this argument? Have we considered what's best for them? Because what's best for the people, the folks at home on the internet, is not best for a dog that's suffering under the yoke of a family that don't love it anymore, and therefore have started to emotionally and physically abandon that dog. In those sort of circumstances, I really feel that's where people really need to make that compassionate call and say, The accountability is now on me to make better choices for this animal. Stop being influenced by people who don't know me and don't know my backstory and don't know the very real challenges that I have. Like, I'm literally at the point where I'm going to cut my ear off over not knowing what to do with sharing a life with this entity.
Mm. Have you seen the movie Strays?
I don't think so.
It's pretty new. It's on Netflix. Another ad for Netflix. It might be one of the funniest movies I've seen in a long time. It's about a little mongrel dog who has this piece of shit owner, and the dog is ruining the owner's life. Now, the owner's a piece of shit, right? Like, he's a real piece of shit. It's a comedy, okay? Right, so you got to bear with me. That Will Ferrell is the voice of the dog. Essentially what happens is the girlfriend of this guy wants to get the dog. They do. He doesn't want the dog at all. The girlfriend likes the dog. It's his dog. He's stuck with it. He doesn't like it at all. And then one day the dog like brings I think it's a pair of underwear or something like that, just carries it out of the bedroom and like brings it out into the living room, and it's not the girlfriend's underwear. So they break up, and now the guy hates the dog even more and resents the dog, but his girlfriend's left and he's now stuck with the dog. The dog explains that they play this game called fetch and fuck, where the guy puts the dog in the car, he drives to the middle of nowhere, throws the ball, playing fetch, jumps in the car and drives off, and the dog has to find its way home. And when it does find its way home, the guy goes, "Oh, fuck, again." and they play the game over again. Eventually, one day, the guy hates the dog so much. The movie is told through the perspective of the dog, who loves the guy and talks about how they play this wonderful game and how he's his best friend and that they have this beautiful existence together. And then one day the guy decides to play like the ultimate game of fetch and fuck and drives him like 7 hours away, right? Throws the ball for him there and then leaves. And so now the dog's in an area that he completely doesn't know, and he's trying to figure out how to get his way back, and hilarity ensues, right? Like, it's a super funny movie. But there's this scene in it I enjoyed the movie a lot. It's a ridiculous movie, but there's this scene in it that's actually really sad, where he realizes, one of these other dogs, that he links up with these two dogs, and they're on this adventure together of him trying to get home. They sort of explain to him like, "Hey man, that guy was dumping you." And the dog, he realizes like the story is about how wonderful his owner is and how his whole existence is for his owner, and he just does everything to be around him because he loves him so much. And his assumption is that the owner is the same, and he can't see that he's being mistreated. He doesn't understand that that's the case because he sees any interaction with the owner as a wonderful interaction. And there's this really sad part in it where they point out to him, they're like, "Hey man, he was trying to dump you. He was trying to get rid of you. He's not playing fetch. He's just throwing the ball so that you don't come back." And then all the scenes that we see along the way of him talking about how wonderful his owner is, now we see them again, but we see them with the dog realizing like, "Oh, he hates me. He was trying to get rid of me the whole time." It's actually quite heartbreaking. So they decide that he is still going to go home, but it's in order to bite his owner's dick off, right? So these three dogs go on this adventure where they're got to figure out how to get back to this other dog's house so that he can bite his owner's dick off. And when they get there, without sort of ruining the movie for everyone, it's got a hilarious ending. But there's another sad part in it where as soon as he's in range of the person, he gets this like, "Oh no, but maybe he does love me." He wants to belong so badly. He wants to be this guy's dog and just have a person that loves and cares for him so much. He then starts to reframe again the way that he's been treated and starts to think, well, like, I am a bad dog. I wasn't a good dog to him. I can be a better dog. There's things like I ruined his life. There's all these things that I have done to worsen the situation, and I'm the one that needs to change, not him. Well, it's just a stupid movie, and it's like it's clearly like a funny stoner movie because the whole movie, there's a third of it at the start and a little bit at the end of, understanding treating a dog well. But the rest of it is just three dogs on a ridiculous adventure to bite off a guy's dick. Like that's the whole premise of the movie. So it's ridiculous. It's not a highly insightful look into the way a dog thinks and feels, but it is a little bit heartbreaking in these parts where I was able to reflect on it of dogs that I've experienced with clients and stuff in the past, where you see these dogs that are like, "Hey man, I just want someone to fucking love me. right? Like I just want to belong to a family because I'm a fucking pack animal and you've brought me into your pack and I need to be a part of it. And those are the situations when you sometimes see someone with a dog and that's not going to happen for the dog. You know what I mean? Like where you can see the dog is like, hey, I just want a fucking relationship. Like all I want in the whole world is to do cool stuff with someone. Now, like there's a spectrum to that. I think it exists with every dog to various levels. There's dogs that are like, no, I just want to sit on the couch with you and I want to live inside your skin and I just want to be next to you and I just need your comfort and presence. And then you get other dogs that are like, no, I'm a hunter and I need your guidance as to how to hunt. And I don't want to sit on the couch with you. I'm not interested in that kind of relationship. But what I need to do is the thing that I'm bred to do relies on doing it with a person and I need you to be that person. There's a spectrum of what a dog needs from the people. But when you see a dog that isn't getting that and you know isn't going to get it, that's when it's like, oh, well, but we have to rehome this dog to someone who wants that. And I think that there's been Facebook famous examples of that. I won't mention names and go into the details, but we see people with reasonably high profile dog trainers that rehome dogs. There was one a few years ago that a lot of people were upset about or making comment over. And when people sort of asked for my opinion on it, they were shocked to hear that I was like, no, I support that entirely. Because if that's not the dog was meant to be a sport dog. And if that's not the type of sport dog that you want, then you're not going to change who that dog is. That dog is what it is. It's developed to be that kind of dog. It's a very powerful and potentially aggressive dog. But the thing is, there's tons of people that love that kind of dog, right? For many people, that's a giant headache of a dog that you don't want anything to do with. But for others, that's a highly desirable dog because that's what they want. That's the dog that's going to be suitable of the kind of work that they're going to do, or that's going to be a dog that lives the way that they're willing to live. And I think that the way that we live with our dogs is a spectrum, and that spectrum is so broad, whether we're talking about the average pet dog owner who just wants a dog skin rug that lays around in the house and gets pat every now and again and looks into their eyes and gives them that oxytocin hit, all the way to people who are like, no, my income relies on me having a dog that's capable of doing the things that I am employed with my dog to be able to do. So that's the kind of relationship I'm looking for with my dog. Me and my dog are work colleagues. We're not friends. And there's dogs that are like, no, that's all I want in my life. All I want is a work colleague, but I want the work, right? And so I think that first of all, acknowledging that spectrum exists, but then also sort of trying to work towards and within it, I think is super important as well. And there's malleability at both ends of that. Like dogs can change a little bit, that's our role as trainers. I think that sometimes as trainers, and certainly I was very guilty of this when I first started training, is that we can get overly operant and we go, well, I can control the dog's behavior. I can make a dog do whatever I want. Skinner taught me, right? All I got to do is reinforce things I want to see more of and punish things I don't want to see any more of. And then, there's an element of as you mature as a trainer, you sort of get to the point where you're like, oh, Mother Nature plays a much bigger role in this than I maybe gave her credit for along the way. I can remember, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, and I certainly have said it to Mike. I remember when I was at Mike Ellis' school, I was probably peak Dunning-Kruger at that point in my training career. I was like, oh, I'm wonderful at this. Like, I'm the best. And I was in the army and I only knew a couple of people who were better at dogs than me. And in my head, I was like, there must only be a couple of people who are better at dogs than me. Right? And then I went to Mike's school and someone asked this question. It was in I think it was the first day. And I can't remember the specifics of the question, but his answer was that, some dogs are like that. And it was around dog aggression. And he was like, that's probably not something that's going to change for that dog. Like that's who that dog is. Yeah. And I remember thinking at the time being like, oh God, like I could change that. And the truth is, I probably could change it for a moment or two, right? Like I could, in that moment, convince the dog to display the behavior that will bring it success. I can convince that dog to avoid some kind of aversive, but it's going to come back. And what was driving that behavior was the emotional state of it. And that emotional state is going to be created by the thoughts and the feelings, the environment, like all that's going to trigger that again. The language that I've learned to use around this kind of thing is rather than explaining to people, well, there's these inherent desires and blah, blah, blah. I just say Mother Nature just whispers in their ear and she's never going to shut up. Mother Nature never fucking shuts up. When there's something like that deeply ingrained, my favorite example in this kind of thing, because I've done so many of them, is Kelpies chasing bikes. In my area here, the amount of kelpies that chase bikes because Mother Nature tells them to do it. And for sure, I can punish them for doing it and I can reinforce them when they don't do it and I can create a happy client. But 2 years later, that client's calling me because they didn't keep up the reinforcement schedule for sure. But also Mother Nature won't shut up to that kelpie. Mother Nature just keeps whispering in her ear, it's been a while. You're not wearing that prong collar. You should definitely chase that bike now. You know what I mean? But so we can move the needle a little bit. We can change the dog a little bit. We can change its behaviors for sure. And we can get deep in and we can help modify the personality of the dog. We can satiate certain things. We can satiate drives in one place so that they're not as expressed so heavily in others. Like there's plenty we can do to move the needle on the dog. And there's plenty we can do to move the needle on people as well. We as trainers, we're kind of limited in this a little bit. We're not psychologists. Yesterday on the live stream that I did for Patreon, this came up as a topic of like, how do you know, someone asked a question around dealing with the reactivity, anxiety of the owners when you're in the house and it's clearly what is causing it with the dog. And my only good answer for that is like, refer that out, you know, like we're not psychologists. You could do some surface level sweeping of cleaning up that house, but you don't want to get into the deep clean on that because we're not trained in that. I don't know how the fuck to do that. As I pointed out in this live stream is I, like many other people these days, are pretty good at identifying people's traumas and making them understand this is why you're acting the way that you are. That's pretty easy to do because most people wear that on their sleeve and they might not realize it themselves. And you can really tear a person down to not much, have them understand why they act the way that they do and make them want to change. But what's really fucking hard is rebuilding that person and convincing them to make that fucking change.
100%.
And that's where people get left all the time, right? Like I saw this so much when you see these like 22-year-old coaching business mentors and shit. And you're like, mate. And they're telling you like when the hardest thing they've ever done is a really fucking heavy deadlift and they're offering to coach people and give emotional support over people who have like significant childhood abuse. And you're like, hang on, man, fucking cool your jets. Like you're definitely going to be able to have this person realize that all their bad life decisions is tied to that for sure. That's an easy thing to do. But having them work through that and change and become a better person on the other side of it is a really tricky and dangerous thing to do. And that's why people go to uni for 7 years to learn how to do that. And they do placements with people who do it professionally. So I digress. We can change dogs quite a lot. That's what we do as a job. But Mother Nature still plays her role. She'll always keep whispering in the dog's ear about who it is and what it should do. And we can move the needle on people a little bit as well. We can make people enthusiastic about the idea of training their dog. We can show them what their dog is capable of. One of the things I love to do is impress people with their dog. Now, that's a fine line that you have to work a little bit there where sometimes we show people in my hands, look what I can do with your dog, right? Like, look how quickly your dog can respond to these things. Look how quickly your dog can learn. Look how easily your dog can fall into the behaviors when we communicate it correctly. Now, that's a fine line because sometimes that inspires people to be better and do more with their dogs. And in other times, it can demotivate them entirely because they just look at you with the dog and go, well, I'm never going to be able to do that. You're an expert. I won't be able to do that. So it's a fine line to work. But we can help people see what their dogs are capable of. We can help people learn to love their dog for who it is and accept it in that way. But sometimes those poles are too far apart. Like sometimes you can't move the dog enough. Sometimes you can't move the person enough. They're never going to be a compatible mix. That exists for sure. And that's the time for me when I then go, okay, maybe this dog isn't the fit for you. This is something that we're going to have to find somewhere new for the dog to go. We're going to have to find a job for this dog to do that isn't here with you. But for me, I have never then said to anyone, I think you should give this dog up to rescue. I'm always like, no, this is your fucking responsibility until you find the next person who wants this responsibility. And with some dogs that are a real headache, that might not be the option. And then you might find that you are stuck with that kind of dog. But that's the issue that I find is for people who, my big thing with giving up a dog is when the dog is just a headache in general, when you're like, okay, this dog's unrehomable, I'm going to give it to rescue. Essentially, what you're doing in that moment is outsourcing the execution of that dog, right? And that's what I can't gel with, right? Like you're putting that dog into a situation where here's this disaster of a dog that's going into rescue, that rescue, maybe people say, oh, it's a no-kill shelter. Well, what that means is that dog's going to live in a kennel for the rest of its life. It's not going to be rehomed because it's a disaster. It's going to go fucking crazy and that kennel's going to get even worse. So when you have those dogs that can't be privately rehomed, they can't be put to work somewhere else, they aren't somebody else's dream dog that you're just sitting on, at that point when you go, well, maybe behavioral euthanasia is the answer here. And if we're going to say that's the answer, then, you know, for sure we need a second opinion on that. We're not just going to make that call ourselves. We're going to have other people take a look at this. We're going to offer the dog to other people who think that they can do better than us, if that's the case. But if the answer is behavioral euthanasia, then that's our responsibility to do that. I'm not going to outsource that to someone else. And so when I've been in that position with pet clients who, like, the dog is a disaster, the dog's an unstable mess, and I say, well, our first point of call should be to give this dog back to the breeder if we know that there is one, or we need at the minimum to tell the breeder about this so that we know, don't do this mating again. This is what is the result. But very often that's not tangible. There is no breeder that can be contacted. There is no availability for that. And when the dog's a dangerous disaster, the idea of putting that dog into rescue, for me, that's just not on the table. Like, that's just not, you're outsourcing the problem. You're just handing the problem off to somebody else. It's a complex issue. It's not something that, you know, like, it's an easy conversation to have, like for us now to have, but that's a really tricky thing to live out in reality.
The concept of anything on paper is always quite simplified. I think when you're mud mapping out anything, whether it be sketching out a building plan or whether you're developing the architecture of training a dog or raising a child, it's always very easy on paper until you're actually living that life and you're invested in the timescape of it. You know, not to make this entirely personal, but it was really resonating with me when you were talking about that movie Strays. A lot of that lifestyle my sister and I lived when we went through a divorce with our biological dad. I remember as a kid that I always used to uphold my father as this mystical figure to everybody. Like, he was this amazing person that was more capable and he was better than everybody else's dad, primarily because I didn't know him and I was living this real fantasy about how important my dad was and how important he was to me. But the reality is, when you break it down, and it's a bit of a sad story, but the reality is he didn't want us anymore. He wanted to move on with his life. He had basically finished with my sister and I and wanted to start another family. He was sort of forced into the relationship of being somewhat of a parental figure by my grandmother, and that only drove a rift between him and his biological mother because he just didn't really want to be involved. When I talk about this, it makes my dad sound like he's a complete piece of shit. He was shit to my sister and I. There's no two ways about it. But he was a 19-year-old guy when he had me. It wasn't really a planned pregnancy. He got my mum pregnant, and my grandmother, being like a militant Christian, came in, stepped in and said, you've got to make good on this promise. You've got to marry this girl and raise this child, do the right thing by the church. I think it was more of a relationship where it was a bit of boyfriend and girlfriend sort of thing, but then it became like a forced relationship with then children on board. Okay. My sister and I were subject to that. That's a hard pill to swallow when you realize that the fantasy that you have or the belief system that you've built around this whole construct is not real. I used to think that my dad was this amazing person and he loved my sister and I unconditionally, and it wasn't true. None of it was true. It didn't mean he didn't love us, and it didn't mean that he didn't have guilt about what he did. We talked about this at the end of his life. That sort of reality for a lot of people, like in a situation where they're either directly involved as the child in a broken relationship or they are the parent in that relationship, they're pretty diabolical situations to be involved in. When I think of those sort of things, I'm probably glad that dogs don't have that sort of understanding that they can move on, and like once they're in another family, they just don't need therapy and it doesn't break them or shatter them or anything like that, because it fucking did to my sister and I. Like, it caused lots of damage to us over our life. You know, that sort of stuff is cruel for anybody that's going through it. Anybody who's been through a broken relationship and one of the parents just bows out of that relationship and doesn't want anything to do with the kids and just wants to have another partition of their life, they don't understand how traumatic that is for the children in that relationship. They don't understand how much, you know, like they do go through that lifestyle when they start realizing, when their brain sort of comes online and when their reality kicks in, they think, well, maybe it was me. Maybe I was a bad kid. Maybe I did something of this. When in reality, it had nothing to do with you. It had the reality of many other things, such as being too young as parents or whatever it may have been. I've just talked about something that's highly personal, but it's just a fact. It's just something that happened, and it's something that I struggled with for many years, and it creates you as a person. Like, it changes you or it models you. But the one thing that you come to terms with when you investigate this or you dig deep into these concepts is, who would I have become without this? Like, I am me because of my experiences in life. Who am I without these experiences? So even though I struggled with this for a long time and it was a burden and it held me back and it did a lot of things that, like, I think kneecapped me in a psychological point of view, it also made me a stronger, more resilient person and a more capable person. I probably think made me empathetic to the thoughts and concerns of not just humans, but also other entities involved in these sort of situations, because I have had these conversations in particularly with other men, like colleagues and friends who have been in similar situations, and I've been able to provide insight based on my own experiences. Not that I'm a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I'm just somebody who's had experience with it, and I've been able to offer advice. When I've seen dogs in those same sort of situations where I can see that the situation is somewhat perilous and it's not good for the dog, and especially, like I said, it was you who inspired me to think differently and feel differently about this. And now I am more connected to people in those sort of situations where I can advise them, you just don't like this dog and you want to get on with your life without it. And all of you are going to suffer while you keep feeling like this, like you're prolonging something that's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. You're going to start getting into that stage where deep resent is starting to kind of form up underneath the bedrock of it all. So there's never really a one solution fixes everything in these instances. That's why I feel that in all of these circumstances, it's got to be based on the individual. And if you're involved, let's say as a trainer involved in behavior in these aspects, then you've got to look a little bit deeper and ask some more questions about the scenario. And you've got to sometimes come to the conclusion of some uncomfortable truths that nobody wants to hear. And you particularly don't want to say. It doesn't want to come out of your lips. And I think interesting with what's been going on in America with the presidential elections and how people have been talking about how they've been repressed on feeling things and saying things. We have been, certainly in my lifetime, more so in the last 5 to 10 years, we have been encouraged to be very repressive about what we think and say about things. Some for the betterment because they've been outrageous. I think some people got too used to being profoundly cruel over social media. But it then spiraled the other way where it really got bizarre, like what you could say and what you could talk about and how minority groups could control censorship on who you were, how you acted and what you said. I guess it's my long-winded ramble on saying that the investigation and assessment in all of these situations is something that you need to come back to. I recall many conversations that we've had over the years that I was involved in NDTF and teaching students. Hundreds of people I had this conversation with either as a group or individually, where any situation that they were getting involved in, I always said to them, you have to start with assessment. It's something that you start with and you have to end with. Like, it's ongoing. It's something that follows you through. You have to really do your checks and balances along the way and saying, is this path correct? It's the question you need to ask yourself continually, like when you're involved in a relationship or whether you're building a training platform or whatever you're doing is this correct? Are we on the right path here, or does something need recalibration along the way? Something may start incredibly. It may be something that for the first couple of years, it was just amazing. But I've been divorced before. I've had one relationship or a legal relationship that ended. I've had multiple relationships in the past that have ended, like boyfriend, girlfriend sort of things. I've had business things that have ended before because many of these things weren't being addressed. Many of these concerns weren't being thought about. Sometimes it was just myself or colleagues have been incredibly enthusiastic about something and just rushed into a situation only to find I don't actually like this. I don't enjoy myself being here. I don't enjoy the company of these people. These days I do things about that. If I don't enjoy something, I'm more vocal about it. If I don't enjoy the company of people, I tend to make it clear that I don't want to be around them anymore or we're done. As I professed in the past, it may not be about them. It may just be about me. It might be that I'm the odd person out in that scenario, and staying there would be a great injustice to everybody involved because I'll just be a miserable brick around them. Like, you have to take responsibility for these things sometimes, and that's when we initially talked about the whole concept, you and I in the back blocks of designing this podcast, it was more about accountability. Accountability isn't just telling other people what to do. Accountability is also taking responsibility for your own shitty behaviors sometimes. And there's a lot of people in the dog industry who aren't doing that right now. Whether it's local here in Australia or it's overseas, they tend to be pointing the finger at other people for the shitty behaviors that they're doing or the poor concepts that they're coming up with of saying, well, the reason that things are going badly in my life is because of you. You're doing this. You're causing the problem. Where they may not realize or they may not be connecting with the way that I behave is making other people behave like this. And that is a big part of accountability, whether we've gone on track about talking about these rescue dogs or we're talking about accountability of things that are transpiring in the industry right now. There does need to be more accountability of people sitting down, maybe in a room by themselves and putting pen to paper and just saying, let me try and map this out. If they're mature and psychologically competent enough to say, let me map this out and just have a look at what's really the common denominator in this situation. Because I've had to do that before with my own funk where I've thought to myself, yeah, in this situation, it's me. I'm the one that's causing the problem. This is where I need to retract myself from this situation because this group of people are fine, but when I'm there, it doesn't create a good vibe. Whereas other people don't do that. They're profoundly fucked up or evil people and they don't care about it. They either don't care about it or they don't recognize it in themselves. I think they actually enjoy the concept of creating fuckery, which is sad. It's terrible. And I was watching a clip the other day, which I also want to inject to your conversation when we're talking about aggression, but also behavior itself. There was a guy called Joe Dispenza who was talking online the other day about how the brain actually is intoxicated by, did you see it as well?
I don't know which part you're talking about, but I'm obsessed with Joe Dispenza. I didn't know you were into it. I just bought his course. I want to go to one of the retreats. I'm kind of obsessed with it.
He talked about how the brain has become intoxicated by chemicals such as adrenaline and cortisol and so forth when you're feeling these big feelings. Because, you know, like you may be going through like a neutralized pattern in your brain and suddenly you're feeling angry or you're feeling upset about something and all of a sudden all these hormones are rushing to your brain, you know, like they're flooding around the system and your brain goes, oh, this is different. We're sort of like in a conundrum at the moment where nothing's really happening, but now something's happening and I'm hungry for this feeling to come back again. And I thought to myself, well, isn't that fascinating? Sometimes you may not be in control. And I certainly see that with dogs where they enjoy the concept of being aggressive. Aggression is a huge reward to them. And we know this. We know that there is a parcel of that. But when Joe sort of made that on a neurology spectrum where I thought to myself, well, that really fills in some holes in some of my thinking, even though I've heard Melanie Uda say similar things before. Robert Topolsky has tapped in these sort of concepts before. He really portrayed it in a very interesting light. Maybe that's why some people are true because they really get off on the way that it feels to be in those sort of situations where they get sort of like a drug hit for being a piece of shit.
Yeah, no, it is for sure. I'm kind of a bit obsessed with Joe Dispenza at the moment. I have been through all of his online stuff. I just bought his brand new course, which just came out last week. And I have been trying to get to one of the retreats, like the week-long meditation retreats. I really want to do it. In fact, there's probably a whole episode in talking about that because there's many, you know, like for me, all of my hobbies, my personal research and all that, like I'm really into that. As you know, probably for the last 5 years or so, I've got very into, I won't say spirituality, but understanding the deeper construct of how the universe actually works. And his stuff's really fascinating. His combined with like the 7 hermetic principles, like, and they're the funny things. Like I would love to relate that to dog training more, but it's a little bit bro science, you know, like I'm not trained in that. It's better to leave that to people like Melanie Uda who are trained in that and can speak with authority on it. But I certainly feel it deep in my soul. And the hermetic principles, there's 7 hermetic principles. And when I was really coming to understand them, I was like, oh, these are the principles of dog training. Like, you know what I mean? But they are because they're the principles by which the universe works and that dog training is just part of the universe. But I think there's a really interesting conversation around that I have been umming and ahhing about it in the course I'm about to release. There's a tab, and I haven't put anything in there yet, but I probably will. I probably will leave it there, called like Pat's Weird Stuff. So the whole course is no, this is real like science, back-upable dog training stuff. Like everything that I teach, if you don't believe me, I can point you to my original sources. Here it all is. Like, this is not my opinion. The only thing that I teach that is my opinion is that hierarchy of signal stuff, which I believe in very, I've done enough personal research on that I feel very confident that that's the truth, in that like what a dog feels like, a tactile command or cue is more important than a visual cue, and a visual cue is more important than a verbal cue. And, you can test that. You can easily put a dog in a situation where it has all three pieces of information that are in conflict, and the dog will do the one that it can feel. But everything else there's science for this. I can back it all up. I didn't make any of it up. I was taught it by people who did the research and whatever. But I want to have like a tab at the back end of the course where I'm like, okay, but here's what I think. There's no evidence for any of this. And this is my like ridiculous thought patterns and how I got to this point and the things I do because I think this way, and they appear to work. I get the results that I want by doing it. But like, I sure as hell, if you want to argue why that works, I'm definitely open to hearing it, because I'm not hanging my hat on why this works, only that it does. So I'm thinking of having that involved in there. But for us, there's probably a topic, like a conversation around the Joe Dispenza stuff that I think is worthwhile for our audience. I think that's maybe an interesting topic for another time. If people are interested in that, please reach out, let me know, because that's something that I catch myself going to talk about numerous times. I'm like, no, stay in your lane, dickhead. Talk about dogs. You don't need to talk about the nature of the universe and how it works. Well, but maybe I will. I don't know. We talked about fucking conspiracy theories and aliens and shit at the start. I'm happy to lay it all out for everybody. I'll go live and fucking explain how I think interdimensional beings can pop in and out of existence. But again, another day.
You became a more interesting person to me when you started to become more holistic about these type of thinkings. I distinctly remember that conversation where you and I were talking about aliens and so forth at the start, and you were like, just nah, and you were shutting down the conversation to say, no, I've been involved in these sort of things before. But like, even from my investigations, which were limited, but like my fascinations, I should say, not my investigations, but my fascinations and the times that I spent really going down that rabbit hole, talking about the Anunnaki and ancient Sumeria and all those sort of things in the past. A lot of people who seemed reasonably credible online who were talking about it always used to say, there'll be people who will come to you and say, no, this didn't happen. Like, I was afforded these clearances and I never saw any of that sort of thing. And he said, there's always categories of where clearances go to. He said, there's always a box that you will fit into where they think, yep, that's enough for you. Like, there are 16 doors in our clearance. You get to go to the fourth door and not beyond that.
That's literally how it works. Just because you have a top secret clearance doesn't mean you get to see everything that's top secret. It's not like it's a blanket. They have what's then called compartments after that. So like, you have to be brief. You have to have the clearance that allows you to even be briefed into the compartment, but you don't get briefed into the compartment unless you have a reason to be briefed into the compartment. And usually then there's an in and an out brief. Without going too deep into it, what I did in the army was deep within a very specific compartment, and that compartment has a specific name. And so just because you hold the clearance doesn't mean that you're briefed into the compartment. You need to have a reason to be briefed into there. And then you literally sign a piece of paper that says like, okay, I am being told about this thing and I'm getting access to it. Your profile within like the DSN and stuff like that is now able to access it. But then when you no longer have a reason for knowing that, like I was the team commander of a certain compartment, and then when I was no longer the team commander, the new team commander had to brief me out, who then you sign a thing saying like, at this date, this is what I knew on all of this, and I still am not going to talk about it. You're closing me off and I accept that, and like I'm out of this, and it will continue to progress without me and I don't need to know anything about it. So it's the opening and closing of a compartment. So that's for sure how it goes. And there are, God, a fuck knows how many compartments there are. There could be an infinite number of them for all I know of. But yeah, for sure, there's plenty going on that we don't know about. The thing that I used to say all the fucking time was that, mate, people can't keep secrets. Like, people talk all the time. If there was a secret alien program, people would be talking about it. No one can keep a secret. People, they get dementia. They start saying things they shouldn't say, like when Buzz Aldrin has been saying.
Oh, yeah. I sent you that clip the other day. How fascinating. I forgot to talk to you about that. That was where he's pulling the faces when they're talking about landing on the moon, and you can see him like so conflicted. But he's also saying to people, nope, that didn't happen. Nope, you just saw.
So like I don't have a big opinion on that, but like that is interesting. We see people start to sort of lose their marbles and forget what they're meant to be saying. That's a risk. But also people do talk. And the Bob Lazar thing, the fucking Area 51, like when people go, oh, what do you think, there's aliens Area 51? And you go, hang on. Area 51 is in the zeitgeist as being like, oh, that's where they keep the aliens. But do you know how it got there? And people are like, oh, no. It's like, because a fucking guy who worked there blew the lid off the whole thing and said that that's where they keep the aliens. So when I used to say, no, someone would talk. Like if that was the case, someone would tell it.
They have been.
They tell it. And no one believes it.
Yeah.
Like the Bob Lazar story is wild that he worked at the place where they had the spaceships, and his wife thought that he was, because he was like going there secretly and not telling her where he was going and was disappearing. She thought he was cheating on her and hired a private eye to follow him. He made the private eye and thought that the people from Area 51 were following him in order to kill him. And so he was like, oh God, I work at a secret base. I've got to get this information out before they kill me. And I'm like, we're not planning on killing you. Well, maybe now that we've talked about it. But if someone's following you, it isn't us. And his wife's like, oh, yeah, I got a private eye to follow you. So, like, that's why we know about Area 51, because the guy who was not meant to tell anyone told everyone.
Yep.
And people go, it's total bullshit. So
he forgot to thank Beyonce.
Yeah, he forgot. No, Bob's still around.
I know
Bob's
he is.
Still...
Where we're talking about all these wild theories to wrap this up, what did you think of the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight?
It was boring. I lost interest by the third round and was like, ugh.
It was totally bizarre. Totally bizarre.
Yeah.
I have a theory on that based on my observations of behaviour and so forth with him biting his glove. Some people are diagnosing that he was in pain and that's why he did it. I think that, like he was scripted along. And Mike Tyson's thing all along, like if you ever listen to him, it's always that he doesn't want to be considered a piece of shit. Like he's very, very strongly worded that in a lot of conversations that he's had with people. I don't want to be thought of as a piece of shit. And I think he's probably thought this is just terrible. Like I'm in the ring just stumbling around after this guy. Therefore, he's biting his gloves in frustration, thinking, how do I deal with this? That the fact that I've got to win $20 million or get this enormous payday for not bashing the shit out of this young kid around the ring. Now, that's one theory because other people might look at that and go, nah, he's 60. He's a 60-year-old guy. Like he's had a health issue before. He stumbled when he came in. Yeah. You watched him leading up to the fight and that guy was still crashing into his sparring partners. Like he was absolutely toweling them up. And then other people said, yeah, but you're seeing like lots of 10-second clips coming together. Like he had opportunities to throw some significant punches, some Mike Tyson style punches, and it never happened. So interesting on the behavioral side of things, especially the biting of the glove. Like I could just see him doing it.
Weird, but didn't he say on that he just has a biting fixation? He might have just been stressed and then
could have.
Stress behaviors come out. I don't know. I don't have big opinions on it. I think that beyond, as I was watching it, I was like, this isn't what I was hoping to see. I was hoping to see Mike Tyson fucking kill Jake Paul in the ring. That would have been great.
Yeah.
But within a few minutes, I was like, this isn't going to go that way. Whether there's more to it, I think there probably is, but I don't have any speculation on it.
Well, there you go. Good place to leave it.
All right. That's it for another episode of the Conspiracy Theorist podcast. If you like, rate, share, subscribe, do that through whatever subscription service you download us from, then go to another one and do it there. They don't check. You're allowed. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to jump into Patreon. A few bucks a month gets you a giant backlog of information as well as new stuff going forward. I did the monthly live stream yesterday. There were way more people in there live than normally. And I thought, oh, wow, people are taking advantage of this. And then I realized because I have this new computer and I set it up off of that and my settings hadn't crossed over, it was a public event, not a private event. So who aren't in the Patreon that were there to see it. So anyway, good for them. They saw me answering questions. So anyway, jump into Patreon. You can check all that stuff out. There's always new stuff going forward in there. I just put a really cool outing video in there last week, I think it was.
Yeah, terrific.
Really cool feedback. And another way you can support the show, you could get yourself a cool wall tapestry or a t-shirt or a hoodie or something like that. You can get that from Spring. There's links in the show notes. While you're in the show notes, jump on our mailing list. We've never used it, but in case social media goes away, we're just building it up so that we can still contact you. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can jump into the Facebook discussion group. That's where we're currently until Facebook goes broke and we have to use our mailing list. But if you want to get in touch with us directly, you can shoot us an email. We are info@thek9paradigm.com. Love you all. Goodbye.
Thanks, Beyonce.
I'm so... Oh.